He stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Steve Harvey, usually the man who could make a nation laugh with just a raised eyebrow, now stood motionless. His eyes had locked on a little boy in the third row, bald, frail, and wearing a thin oxygen tube under his nose. The cameras were still rolling, the crowd uncertain whether this was part of the show or something far deeper. Then, breaking every rule of television, Steve dropped his cue cards, stepped off the stage, and walked straight into the audience. That was the moment Family Feud turned into something else entirely. "Son," he said softly, his voice trembling, "come here." The boy's mother tried to protest, whispering that he couldn't stand too long, but Steve gently raised his hand. The audience fell into complete silence. No music, no laughter, no banter. Just the quiet hum of the studio lights and the sound of a man trying to hold back tears. Steve knelt beside the boy. "What's your name, champ?" "Marcus," the boy whispered. "I watch your show every night." Steve smiled, but his lip quivered. "Well, Marcus, tonight, you're the real host." The audience gasped. Behind the cameras, producers were panicking. This wasn't in the script. Steve ignored them. He took off his suit jacket, the signature light gray one, and gently wrapped it around Marcus's shoulders. And just like that, the crowd that had come to laugh began to cry. Flashback. The day had started like any other taping day at Family Feud. Steve had been in his dressing room, cracking jokes with the makeup team, reviewing cue cards, and playfully complaining about his mustache needing its own contract. But as he walked to the stage, his assistant handed him a note, handwritten, folded twice. It read, "Dear Mr. Harvey, my son Marcus has stage 4 cancer. His dream was to meet you, but we couldn't afford the trip. A local church raised the money for us to come today. He doesn't have much time left, but he smiles every night watching your show. Thank you for giving him that joy. Rosa, his mom." Steve kept that note in his jacket pocket. During the first round, he kept glancing toward the audience, spotting Marcus in the third row, his mother holding his hand. By the second round, Steve's rhythm faltered. His timing, usually razor-sharp, softened. The laughter still came, but he wasn't quite there. He kept catching Marcus smiling back at him, waving when he thought the cameras weren't on. Then came the breaking point. During a lightning round question, Steve read the prompt. "Name something you'd never want to lose." The contestant buzzed in, "My phone." The audience laughed. Steve smiled mechanically, but then he looked toward Marcus again. The boy whispered something to his mother. Rosa leaned down, and then she raised her voice just enough for Steve to hear. He said, "I'd never want to lose my time." That was it. The world seemed to stop. Steve dropped the card. His body turned before his mind caught up. He walked off the stage, ignoring the camera cues and the producer's frantic signals. Every rule of television melted away. He reached Marcus, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You just gave the best answer anyone ever could." He held the boy's hand, rough and trembling from hospital needles, and placed a microphone in front of him. "Marcus," Steve said, "you tell me something. What do you love most about life?" The boy took a deep breath, his oxygen tube rustling softly. "When people laugh, it makes my chest hurt less." For once, Steve didn't know what to say. Behind the scenes, the director whispered through the headset, "Cut the feed." But Steve shook his head slightly, signaling them not to. "This is real," he murmured, "and real don't need a script." The audience began to cry openly. One of the contestants dropped their buzzer, walking to the edge of the stage. The opposing family followed. In that moment, there were no teams, no competition, only people standing in reverence for a little boy who reminded them what joy really meant. Steve took a deep breath. "Marcus," he said, "I've met presidents. I've interviewed legends. But you, son, you're the bravest man I've ever met." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside was his personal business card, the one few people ever saw. He handed it to Marcus's mother. "You call this number," Steve said. "Anything you need, flights, hospital bills, medicine. Don't even think twice. We'll handle it." Rosa began to sob, shaking her head. "We didn't come for money, Mr. Harvey. We came because he wanted to thank you." Steve kneeled again, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You already did. You reminded me what this is all for. The crowd stood, slowly at first, then with roaring applause that filled the studio like a wave. Even the camera operators, professionals trained to never break focus, were wiping tears from their eyes. "Subscribe and leave a comment," Steve said softly, turning toward the camera. "Because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." The show continued, but it wasn't the same. Every laugh that followed had a little more meaning. Every smile carried a trace of gratitude. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, Steve received a package at his office. It was a small box with a child's handwriting. Inside was a letter and a tiny toy car, blue, with the words "To Steve, my best friend," written on the bottom. "Dear Mr. Harvey, thank you for letting me be the host. I kept your jacket on my bed so I could dream big. Mom said God might need a new host up there soon. Don't be sad. Keep making people laugh. Marcus." Steve read it alone in his office. Then he called his assistant and said, "Cancel my next meeting." He sat in silence for a long time. Then, slowly, he took off his watch, the one his father had given him, and placed it inside the box with the toy car. From one host to another, he whispered. That night, he told the story live at a charity event. Not a dry eye remained in the audience. "You never know," he said, "when your laughter is keeping someone alive." In the months that followed, Steve quietly established a foundation for children battling terminal illness, the Marcus Promise. It sent comedians and entertainers to hospitals, bringing laughter to the places that needed it most. He never advertised it. He didn't post about it online. But those who worked with him said every time he walked into a hospital, he carried that same jacket, the one he gave to Marcus, neatly folded over his arm. Years later, during a special anniversary taping of Family Feud, Steve shared the story publicly for the first time. "People think this show is about questions and answers," he said, "but it's really about people, about the laughter that keeps us standing when life tries to knock us down." He paused, his voice cracking. "And about a little boy who taught me that time is the only thing we never get back." The audience stood again, not because the cameras told them to, but because the moment demanded it. He turned toward the lens one final time. "Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." As the credits rolled, a small photo appeared on the screen. Marcus, smiling in Steve's jacket, holding that blue toy car. The symbol lived on, a jacket that became a reminder of empathy, a car that became a vessel of legacy. In every episode since, whenever Steve meets someone going through a struggle, he takes a deep breath, remembers Marcus, and asks quietly, "What's something you never want to lose?" It's no longer just a game show question. It's his prayer. Every laugh, every pause, every heartfelt silence on that stage carries the echo of one small voice. A boy who said, "Laughter makes my chest hurt less." And maybe that's what leadership really is. Not standing above people, but kneeling beside them. The Family Feud studio still glows with warm light. The same set, the same laughter, the same rhythm. But somewhere between the buzzers and the applause, there's a sacred stillness. A place where Steve Harvey once stopped the show, not to entertain, but to remind the world that humanity matters more than any punchline. He never forgot. Neither did the millions who watched. Because once, on a stage built for laughter, a man chose compassion instead of comedy, and the world, for a few precious minutes, stood still. And in that silence, something eternal was born weeks after the taping. The world had moved on, but Steve Harvey hadn't. The cameras, the laughter, the lights, they all returned to normal, but inside him, something permanent had shifted. Every night before bed, he found himself reaching for that little box on his dresser, the one that held the toy car and the note from Marcus. It wasn't just memorabilia. It had become a reminder that purpose doesn't come from fame, but from connection. He'd always believed in making people laugh, but now, laughter meant something deeper. It was no longer just entertainment. It was medicine. One afternoon, Steve's assistant knocked on his office door. "Mr. Harvey, there's someone here to see you." He looked up from his desk. "Who is it?" "She says her name is Rosa. Marcus's mother." The name hit like a wave. He stood slowly, his chest tightening. "Send her in." When Rosa walked in, she wasn't the same woman from the show. Her hair was shorter, streaked with gray, and her hands trembled as she held a small envelope. Her eyes, though tired, still carried that quiet strength of a mother who had walked through fire and kept moving. "I didn't know if I should come," she said softly, "but Marcus asked me to give you something. I didn't have the heart to send it through the mail." She handed Steve the envelope. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Marcus wearing Steve's jacket, smiling wide, the Family Feud logo glowing behind him. Beneath it, in Marcus's handwriting, was a message written in blue crayon. "Thank you for letting me be brave. Now it's your turn." Steve had read thousands of letters in his life, but none had ever pierced him like that. He sat down, his face in his hands, and whispered, "He's still teaching me." Rosa sat across from him. "You know," she said quietly, "that night changed everything for us." After the show, Marcus said he didn't feel like a patient anymore. He felt like a person again. "You gave him that." Steve shook his head. "He gave me something too. He reminded me that what we do here, it matters more than we think." They talked for hours. About Marcus, about faith, about the strange ways love leaves fingerprints on the world, even after someone's gone. Before Rosa left, she handed Steve another small object, Marcus's toy car, the one he'd carried everywhere. "He wanted you to have this," she said. Steve hesitated, but this was his favorite. She smiled gently. He said, "Mr. Harvey will know what to do with it." After she left, Steve sat in silence, holding that car. The weight of it was tiny, but its meaning was enormous. He placed it on his office shelf, right between his daytime Emmy Award and his photo with President Obama. That night, he couldn't sleep, so he got his car and drove. No cameras, no security, just him. He ended up outside a children's hospital in downtown Atlanta. It was nearly midnight, but the lights inside were still on. He walked in quietly, talking to the nurses, asking if he could visit the kids. They recognized him immediately, but he waved off the attention. "No photos," he said. "Just let me talk to them." He spent hours there, sitting on the edge of hospital beds, telling jokes, listening to stories, holding hands. The kids didn't care that he was famous. They cared that he was present. When one little girl asked, "Are you really Steve Harvey?" he smiled and said, "I'm whoever makes you laugh right now." By dawn, he walked out of the hospital, emotionally exhausted but spiritually alive. He pulled Marcus's toy car from his pocket, set it gently on the hospital sign, and whispered, "Keep driving, champ." From that night on, everything about his career changed. He started a segment on Family Feud called Moments That Matter, where he invited guests who'd overcome hardship, survivors, teachers, parents, people who represented the quiet heroism of everyday life. He turned his show from just a game into a platform for human stories. And every time the audience laughed, every time someone left the studio smiling through tears, Steve would glance at the side of the stage where a small blue toy car now sat, permanently displayed in a glass case. It wasn't decoration, it was legacy. In interviews, journalists would ask, "Steve, what keeps you going after all these years?" He'd smile and say, "A kid once told me laughter makes the pain hurt less. I'm just trying to keep doing that for as long as God lets me." Years passed, and the story of that Family Feud moment became legend. Replayed on social media, studied in film schools, even used in leadership seminars as an example of empathy in action. But to Steve, it was never about the viral clip. It was about that instant when he stopped being a host and became a human being. One night, after another long taping, Steve sat alone in the studio. The crew had gone home. The lights were dimmed, the buzzer silent. He walked to the audience section, right where Marcus had once sat. He could almost hear the faint echo of that child's laughter, that fragile, beautiful sound that had changed everything. He whispered into the empty room, "You still with me, little man?" And somehow, in that quiet, he felt it. Not as a sound, but as a warmth, a presence, a reminder that every act of kindness leaves a light behind, one that never burns out. When he left the studio that night, he turned back for one last look at the stage. The Family Feud sign glowed above, but beneath it, Steve didn't see a game show anymore. He saw a sanctuary, a place where joy and pain, laughter and loss could coexist. He smiled to himself, and whispered, "Thank you, Marcus. You helped me remember who I am." The next morning, he returned to work with a different kind of fire in his eyes. Not the ambition of a celebrity, but the purpose of a man who knew that laughter was sacred. Because somewhere between the jokes and the tears, Steve Harvey had discovered the truth that every great soul eventually learns. The most powerful stories aren't told through success or applause, but through the moments when we choose compassion over comfort. And from that day forward, every time he stood before an audience and said, "Welcome to Family Feud," he knew he wasn't just starting a show. He was continuing a promise. A promise made to a little boy who believed that laughter could heal the world.